What's going on, guys? Welcome to In the Zone, where we dive deep into the world of skill acquisition, being mentally in the zone, and various training zones. I'm your host, Garrison Roy. And if you're new to the show, we do have several different types of episodes here. You have your interviews, your full length conversations that we have with coaches, experts, athletes, and the like. That's just your typical podcast, right? Then we have rants where I go on, vent about some hot topics, call out some of the BS in the industry of baseball, and, maybe have a few nuggets in there or two. And then I got mental minutes, which are quick mental game hacks to help elevate your performance. And then deep dive educational explorations to the small little intricacies of either skill acquisition or being in the zone, just the more sciencey type stuff. So you can see those and be able to know what you're getting into before you even click on the episode. But if you have any questions, topics, guests, or suggestions on who you want to have on, you can email that in to endthezonepodcast123@gmail.com. Because we don't do ads or sponsorships, monetize the show in any way. We believe in value exchange. So share the show and help us grow it through word of mouth. Share it on your story or send it over to a friend. That's how it works. But for today's episode, we're going to go into a rant. And this one's titled, Don't Die on Your Preferences. And this is going to go kind of more really all over the place, which is why it's going to be a rant. But it could be more on the side of recruiting. This could be in training. This could be in coaching as well, right? So we'll start with coaching since it's probably the easiest one to kind of pinpoint, right? So what I mean by preferences, I'm going to kind of start this, reel it in with a story to start. And I actually kind of heard this from another speaker and I was like, oh, you know what? Actually, this is very applicable to the baseball industry, right? It was Dan Kiesler, for any of you guys who might know about him. But anyways, he was basically going in and saying, hey, we all have our preferences in life, right? And he made the famous argument for everyone, looked out into the crowd and said, hey, how many of you guys like Twizzlers? About half the crowd raised their hand. And he's like, okay, hands down. How many of you guys prefer red vines? And then there was probably like maybe half of the other half that raised their hand, and the other half was just like, I don't really care, right? And again, not saying that either one was right or wrong. It was just their preference of what they preferred, right? What they like the most. Now, you can turn this into coaching as far as, hey, this is what I prefer on bunt defense, or this is what I prefer on how guys do warm-ups, or plyo drills, or tee or no tee, right? Those are all preferences, but they're not based on how guys actually get better all the time, right? Like you could have one set of way of doing things. Some guys will get better, some guys won't. It's kind of a bell curve of results there, if you will, right? So you have, if you're familiar with the bell curve, right, it kind of starts low, goes all the way up, and then back down, kind of like a little hump, right? And you split that in half. You have one half where, there's the bottom tier, and the other half is the upper tier. But you can take those, and if you're into statistics, especially if you're baseball nerds out there, you'll know that there's certain standard deviations away from that average or from that middle of that hump, and where most of those outliers are on the very edge, right? So usually if you're throwing in a one-size-fits-all program, you're going to have that middle area or where the average would be of results of whatever, either it's a throwing program or strength training program or test results, whatever you want to put out there, right? But as you get further and further away, right, then you have the outliers of guys who either just flat out didn't get better at all, or the outliers of the guys who had tremendous upside, right? And again, a lot of these is just how the ball rolls, but you can't say, and we'll use this same example of Twizzlers versus red vines, that all the people who prefer Twizzlers are going to be in the upper echelon of that bell curve. And all the people who refer red vines are in the bottom echelon of that, right? You can't really say that because there's probably a mixture of a bunch of those, especially if you put that into a big scatter plot. You would be able to see that people, regardless of whatever their, I guess, results or their performance are going to be, it's not going to be based on the type of candy that they eat, or in this case, the type of training or coaching or practicing that they do. Not always. Now, there is, again, within that means of averages there, right? And you can replace this with Whataburger versus In-N-Out, even if you're not a candy person, fill it in however you want. But the biggest thing is you don't want to die on that hill of a preference. Another example would be for recruiting, right? Now, there are certain preferences that I think you would need to have as staples or things that you're looking for, right? Myself, I was looking for people who, were looking for development, and they were open-minded about certain things and how I was currently training. If they would let me continue to do that, that was one of my preferences and one of my things that I looked for. Also being a good baseball program, having academics alongside that, right? And so on and so forth. But some guys kind of died on that hill of a preference where they were like, I prefer D1 over anything. Sure, if that's what you prefer, but guess what? You may not actually be D1 material, at least not right out of high school. That's why I decided to go JUCO route. Right. And again, not saying one is better than the other. There's guys that have came out, performed really well off of both of those, right? Bryce Harper being one, never went to a top tier Division I Power 5 school, obviously in the bigs, and still crushes it. Then you also have, on the other hand, guys who developed all the way through 4 years in school, and they're also crushing it. So again, there is no right or wrong answer here with really any of this. And that's the thing that I want to harp to a lot of coaches and even athletes, upcoming players, and even parents that are listening to this. There will be no one size fits all, really, for anything for that matter. And that's why even through Ink Sports Performance, what me and Rob do with all of our athletes, we treat each athlete like a blank canvas. And this is something that you are never going to get the same program for anyone, really, because everyone has different starting points upon their map of their journey to developing to be at their best. Right? So the last one that I guess I'll kind of add on here, outside of the food preference, the recruiting preference, or just general coaching, and I'm guilty of this too, but preferring, either certain drills or things like that, and saying, hey, you need to only do this one because it's only going to yield this, and you shouldn't do that one, or preferring, even not to do something. Because I've shut down a lot of guys where, hey, I prefer if you actually do it this way. And they were actually doing just fine. But I've only seen myself starting to only insert myself if I know that it's for sure hindering their performance. So if you see a guy, he's cutting it in the game, and you see him doing other stuff on the side that's promoting that, and be like, hey, let's pose a question here. Do you think that if you stopped cutting the ball in plyos, that you would actually probably have more spin efficiency on their fastball? Versus me kind of being more of a dictator coach saying, hey, you need to stop doing this because this is going to cause cutting fastball, blah, blah, blah. Well, who knows? Maybe this guy is trying to be a cutter guy, or maybe that's what his outlier pitch is. And then I just totally took that away from him by inserting myself into inserting my preference of how he should throw things into his daily routines. Right. So again, that's just my little rant here. I hope you guys got something out of this. Share it, send it over to a friend, and stay in the zone.